Alvin Fiske. This sketch is written from the viewpoint of one native to the South who came to Wendell as a summer resident in 1938, the year of the first modern and most remembered hurricane. In the early history of this nation, the people of the South felt friendship and admiration for New England. The leaders there were fellow patriots. Great John Adams was a bit crusty, but his self-importance was offset by the romantic figures of John Hancock and Paul Revere. James Otis's piercing oratory reminded of our own Patrick Henry. Sam Adams' gifts in public relations were superior to the ardor of Christopher Gadsden, but nobody could equal the Boston propagandist for independence. New England had no one quite like Washington, but General Henry Knox was a favorite comrade of the commander-in-chief. 50 years slid by and turned the South's affection for New England to suspicion and hatred. The controversy over slavery was a cause. The several New England states were differently regarded. Maine did not matter much in the Southern mind, for it was half frozen. New Hampshire and Vermont were mostly mountains, though the few people in those heights were regarded as agents of the devil. Rhode Island rested under the benign christening of Roger Williams. Connecticut was filled with sharpers, but they were commercial rather than political. But Massachusetts appeared to the South to be the distillation of evil. William Lloyd Garrison, Prince of the Abolitionists, was Boston-based. The tall anti-slavery Senator Sumner was every inch outrageous. The Massachusetts people were educated, intrusive in public affairs, ready to preach morals to everybody else. The South could have borne with other New England states, but not with the righteousness of Massachusetts. This was concentrated in the mischievous vigor of Boston. A generation after the Civil War, the Southerners' distaste for New England lingered. My parents and teachers discounted such prejudice, but the atmosphere of opinion in Richmond, Virginia, the old capital of the Confederacy, was sullenly hostile. If when I came to Wendell I needed to be purged of distrust, the people of this town reassured me. I heard nobody speak of the South with contempt, as though we were a cultural swamp. One Wendell neighbor may stand for the rest. Alvin Fiske was the refutation of every false idea of New England as I had heard in Virginia and South Carolina. He was not rigid, but relaxed. His speech was not sparse and acid, but was unhurried and cordial. Selfish and grasping was supposed to be the type, but he was ever friendly and helpful to a newcomer. In an August drought that greeted our arrival, he loaned us one of his large milk cans in which to store water from a distant spring. Most of his cash living was as a dairyman, but he was also woodsman, farmer, mechanic, hunter, fisherman. He was a store of country wisdom. When nearly everyone else had ceased to live from the land, he continued cultivating, haying, hauling with horses. He stored ice cut from a pond in winter, chilled his milk in a tank fed by gravity from a spring. Alvin Fiske was a conservationist, although no one called him that. He lived from what was extracted from nature, but carefully husbanded those resources. He welcomed the state's suggestion that a pair of beavers be located in his little pond. Once they had built a dam, he stocked the pond with fish. He was a leader in a group called the Franklin County White Hare Association. He may have wanted the hares for Mrs. Fiske's kitchen pot, but first there had to be enough of them. So far from the traditional grim countenance of New England granite, Fiske was a humorous man. One instance may serve as illustration. As the great hurricane of September 21st, 1938 roared past, he scurried about the place, securing and battening down everything loose. One thing escaped him, however. Above the howl of the wind, he heard something behind him and looked over his shoulder. "I've been chased by a lot of things," he said later, "but never before by a privy." Always working during the day, when you went to his house at a leisure hour, he begged you to sit down, was ready for conversation. Though he had inherited his Wendell farm from father and grandfather, I tell you the man might have been from Georgia or Alabama, though the industry and ingenuity are not so prominent in my native parts. He stayed on the farm for a few years after Mrs. Fiske's death, helped after a time by a comfortable Irish housekeeper, Mrs. Morrissey. But before 1960, he was gone, spending his last few years in Northfield. An arsonist destroyed the empty house, and the new owner of the land removed all traces of the buildings and filled in the cellar hole. After 20 years, no trace remains of the fact that the place was farmed for upwards of 100 years. What was the Fiske driveway is the community's access to a pond, now a local swimming hole. Most who used it never heard of Alvin Fiske, but a few of us remember. Thank you.